Rashod, man, thanks so much for coming to hang out.
Thanks for having me.
I was looking at, I do a lot of research. I look people up a little bit, make sure I can know a little bit about them before I have them on. And I was on your blog, and there's this passage in there that really resonates with me. It says, I've been passionately obsessing over cars and actively engaging the local car community in Los Angeles for at least 10,000 hours. I've chosen this life over buying a house, getting married, or having kids. I don't think those are prerequisites, but objectively, I have prioritized motoring enthusiasm over most things in my life. For better or for worse, this is the manifestation. And I want to kind of know, why did you choose this lifestyle for yourself? Like, what is it about this lifestyle that basically that you've chosen it over house, marriage, kids, a lot of the other things that a lot of other people choose? What is it about it?
Yeah, that's such a good intro and good question. I hadn't really thought about that. I hadn't read that passage in a while, but it's just something that happened very naturally. I just kind of fell into it. I would say that I always enjoyed cars and have been a fan of cars for a very long time, and recently started to be in a position to be able to afford that. But I don't know. I think if you have this ism or this bug, it just kind of chooses you, and it's hard to explain why. And what I like to give my audience is a true reflection of what this looks like for me. And I know it doesn't have to be everybody's story. Like, I know a lot of people that are into this car stuff and they have a big fancy house and a wife that allows them, or a partner that allows them to do these things. That just happens to be my slice of the story. I wouldn't say that I like intentionally chose one or the other, but yeah, I don't know. I think this life kind of chose me, and I just went in head first there, and I'm enjoying the ride.
So when did you dive in? What was head first, or when did you realize, oh shit, this is me? This is me now. Where did this start for you?
And forgive me, I'm a little bit under the weather, so I have a cough drop.
It's
But
all good.
I there's been different phases for me. I would say my earliest memory is building model cars. So like 6'4" Impalas, and living in South Central LA. That was a thing we used to. People would say this was extreme, but we used to like candy paint the model cars. And
Dang.
I had an uncle cousin by marriage type scenario who taught me how to like put hydraulics on the model cars. So this is like really, really old school.
So you have like a little remote and everything, and the cars are moving?
Yeah, it
Dang.
was like a little switch, like literally a little switch.
Man.
And, you could do like three-wheel motion. Like, I'm showing my age when I say that, but like some people that used to do that, they'll be like, yep.
Yeah, I
So
know
that's
what
when it
you mean.
started. And then remote RC cars were really big when I was a kid as well. And I remember uh,
Hold on, before
that,
we get like
get
away from the model car thing too much, was that like when you were, other than the model cars, when you were out in the world as little Rashad, were you seeing these cars too? Were these cars like, if you're in South Central, were they out there? Were they prominent? You're seeing the lowriders, you're seeing this stuff, you're watching MTV, you're seeing them there. Was that what you were
yeah.
into?
Yeah, I was young and I didn't have family members that drove lowriders and whatnot, but we lived in South Central LA. I would say not necessarily like, not super duper close to Crenshaw, which is where you would see, you could go to Crenshaw on a Sunday or a Saturday and see these lowriders. And so it wasn't like an everyday thing that I would see the lowriders, but I definitely lived in LA and you would see them occasionally. I probably saw them most on MTV or Dr. Dre videos and
Yep.
things of that nature. Dr. Dre's early videos really stand out as a place where I would see them the most. But you definitely would see them like in the streets. But you had to be careful. Like where I'm from in the hood, you had to be careful driving around your nice car, whether it was a luxury car or a tricked out 6'4" Impala, or as we would say, 6'4". You had to be careful because the people will run up on you quick. So, but
Was
yeah,
it
I
a
definitely
take your
saw them
shit
in.
kind of thing, or was it a jealousy and envy
Oh
kind
yeah,
of thing?
no, they'll take it. If you got money in a deprived area, they'll take it. And then gangs were really big back then, so you had to be the wrong color. There's a lot of things that you had to be mindful of maneuvering in South Central Los Angeles in the 80s.
Did you experience any of that yourself when you started getting older and driving?
And in terms of people running up on me,
Yeah, anything like what were you driving back then? What were you driving?
well, I actually moved from South Central Los Angeles to the suburbs of
Okay.
Atlanta at the age of 11.
Oh, that's a big move, man.
So yeah, I had quite the juxtaposition, and so
You had to change out your whole
my
CD library, dude. Like,
I kept it. No, I kept it a buck with LA music, but so my coming of driving years were actually based in Atlanta. And that was a whole nother sort of culture shock and seeing my first car, to answer your question, that was like a Pontiac Grand Am or something, some sort of like hand-me-down car that I drove illegally at the age of 15 and wrecked on the first drive.
dude, I had a Grand Am and I drove it through a fence. What did you do? Like that was my wreck and it was at like a homeless shelter. I drove her through the fence and all these people came out like, yo, man, are you all right? And I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry. I just drove through your fence. What did you do?
I hit it. My mom gave me the car, and we were young. And in the South, they would let you drive. I don't know if it was a time or a location, but in the South, you could get away driving, at a young age, in a rural area like we were in. And I think I took the car, drove to like a restaurant called like Qdoba or maybe a Jersey Mike's or something like that. Okay. And crashed into an elderly white man coming out.
Into the guy?
Yeah, like I crashed. He was in a truck.
Okay. Oh man. Yeah. So there's 15-year-old Rashod already running into people. Oh man.
Yeah.
When did so a Grand Am isn't like exactly the seed of enthusiasm. Where's the seed of automotive enthusiasm after that?
Yeah. So the first car that I actually purchased for myself was a Mitsubishi Eclipse. And that actually came from my mom. My mom had a Mitsubishi Eclipse, and so it just seemed like a very natural progression. But up to that point, I grew up. I was a poor kid, but I grew up around very, very wealthy kids. And so my best friends, my one of my close best friends was the son of a top 3 most famous boxers of all time. So he drove a Range Rover when we were 15. He was 14. So he had a Range Rover when we were 14, a brand new one. And then we did weird things. So I would drive my friends' cars up until I got to into my college years where I had to, purchase my own car. But so Range Rover, the new Beetle, when the Beetle was really hot, like the new Beetle had came out and it was like the Cat's Meow. PT Cruiser, believe it or not, like a PT Cruiser when it was the Cat's Meow, it was like the hottest thing ever. Ford Expedition, Acura MDX. I always like to relate to the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. My rich dad drove Jaguars, like he had like an XK8 or something like that, convertible. We used to drive an old school 850i, like the ones that are popular right now.
Yeah.
I used driving an 850i in the woods of Georgia at like 16 years old, and I remember I got it stuck on the side of the road, like with mud and stuff like that. We had this very funny memory of us, like, because the car's not that big. I think there was like 3 of us crammed in there. And I remember I had pulled over trying to make a U-turn, and the roads were narrow, and like there was no sidewalks or anything, just dirt, and it was rain, and I guess the tires were either like no tread tires or bald, and I got the car stuck in the mud, and we literally had to I was like teenagers driving around an 850i,
obeying the speed limit at all times.
Yeah, owned by somebody famous or semi-famous, and we had to get out and push the car and get all muddy in the process and stuff like that. So yeah, those were my early car experiences. And then when I got to college, my mom had a Mitsubishi Eclipse when I was in high school that I wrecked. And then it came time for me to buy a car, and I just my mom was like, just go to the dealership. They'll give you something. Just go to the dealership. And I was like, all right. And so I went up there, got the crappiest deal ever on a red '99 Mitsubishi Eclipse, and
Which one was it? Are we talking like GSX? Like what? Wait, like
nah,
all wheel drive turbo, right?
nah, it was like an automatic RS, probably the
Yeah.
basic one that I could afford,
Yep.
and then subsequently, I think Fast and Furious kind of came out around that time, and so
Yes, it did.
my early real car, and I have different phases of car enthusiasm, but that phase was probably mired in me putting black Motegi FF7s on my red Mitsubishi Eclipse, and lusting after the Evo, which was like higher up in the food chain, and the 3000 GT I think was out at that time, and so yeah, I always feel like in every phase of my car journey, there's something that I'm enjoying in the moment, and then something that I'm like lusting after. But that's what I remember at that time was being in the sort of the Mitsubishi Japanese car phase.
What was the scene like? If you could describe what that was like that back then for you.
Wow, nothing like what I would say the scene is here in Los Angeles today. But it was just a bunch of teenagers driving around their rich parents' cars, and there was no real scene. It wasn't really about cars. I wasn't like plugged into the car scene. I did have buddies that were like into tuner cars, and so I remember when I got my Eclipse, I had a buddy that had a Honda Civic that was super geeked out about it. He like pumped me up. He's like, "Oh, this is cool. You can get rims." We would get rims anyway, though. Like as black enthusiasts, like
Yeah.
this was the scene. You buy a car, you go straight to the rim shop, then you go get your windows tinted, and then you go to the radio shop, and then you got your car. That was the scene for the black crowd, at that time.
Was
But
it mark specific at all? So you're getting rims on whatever you got, or are you trying to find
yeah,
certain types of cars, or you're just like whatever it is, it's got to have rims on it?
whatever it is, you got to have rims on it. If it's a Pontiac Grand Am, you got to have rims on
Okay.
it. So yeah, and then there was a bunch of stuff just adjacent. But when I had the Eclipse, and Fast and the Furious was around. Like I kind of got pulled into the tuner scene, and so it was like go get the rims, go get the air intake, and doing all of those little tweaks, and then adjacent to that. Um, I also grew up with a kid whose parents owned Southern Off-Road Specialists in North Georgia, and they're a really really big like off-roader setup outfit. And so adjacent to all of that stuff that I was talking about, which is like rims, radio, tinted windows, or the tuner
Yeah.
Japanese stuff, there was the big truck scene where I was dating a girl that had a Jeep. I used to drive my buddy's lifted 1500 Ram with the 44-inch super swampers. Like
Yeah.
all of that was all happening at the same time.
And was it like were these different? Were, when I got into the car scene here, it was very segregated. So you'd have
Mm-hmm.
like the white dudes were driving European cars, the Asian dudes had the imports, the black guys had the cars with the rims, and it was very, very, very segregated. Nobody really like integrated with any other group. It just wasn't something. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but we just didn't go hang out with the other guys. Was it like that where you were as well?
Kinda, but also not really at the same time, because the town that I grew up in Georgia was a predominantly white suburb, and so there just wasn't that much diversity to speak of, period. And so there wasn't enough black people or enough Asian people to have like their own little scene, and
Mhm.
so we all just kind of like integrated together. If
What,
there was segregation, I would just say that there was probably there was definitely a difference between the car rims, sounds, tent crowd versus the lifted truck mud boggers crowd. There was definitely that delineation, but not necessarily along racial lines. Although very clearly, like the lifted truck off road thing was like a predominantly like white thing for sure. But
did you have a
yeah,
pretty
we
good
had.
experience with that? Or go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, did you have like a primarily good experience with that, or was there like some moments where you're like, "Yep, I'm black. Yep, I am." Was there anything like that that came up with this?
Well, yeah, I mean, not so much in the car scene, which is a beauty for me. I've always felt, uh, ironically, despite motoring while black, like I have always felt a lot of love in the car scene and a lot of advocacy and a lot of support. Not always, but um, you know, it was the South. And so when we're talking about my childhood, the parts that made me very aware of my blackness is when our rival high school had like a KKK rally in the parking lot of the rival high school, right? And it just so happened that a lot of the big truck guys. So to get very specific, I grew up in North Fulton County, Georgia, and right next to North Fulton County, Georgia, is Forsyth County, Georgia. And there's, people say the KKK started in different parts of the world or whatever. But when I told my dad where I lived and whatnot, he is from South Georgia, and he lived in California when I moved to Georgia. And I told him where I was running around and who I was dating, and he's like, "You're dating a white girl from Forsyth County? Are you trying to get hung?" Like, so I think it was like comments like that made me very aware of my blackness, and then like legit KKK rallies and stuff like that. But that didn't typically bleed into the car scene. The one thing I will say is that like you saw a lot of Confederate flags on the big trucks, like on the big lifted trucks. There was a lot of that like Confederate flag energy. But for whatever it's worth, like a lot of those kids and I mean we were kids at the time, but a lot of my friends who would rock like the stars in the bars and all that, like they were kind to me. They like loved me and I really got a chance to like understand when people meant heritage, hate, or pride, not prejudice. And now we're adults and we can speak about it in a different way and sort of make those connections whether people realize it or not. Right. But at the time, like I was exposed to a lot of that, but I really understood one of my best friends that I worked with for years. A dude, I haven't talked to him in years, but if I had to jump in front of a bullet for this guy today, I would still like we were like that. And I used to drive a big ass Dodge Ram with a Confederate flag in the rearview mirror, and like he had given me rides in that car and all types of stuff. And I just remember having some really intimate conversations with him about like the Confederate flag and what that meant for my people and like things like that. But I would say those are some of the intersections where I became very, very aware of my blackness.
How do you meet in the middle like that? Ride in a truck with a guy. He's got a Confederate flag in the back window, and you're just like buddies. Like how do you come to that point where you guys can just talk? Because it seems like from like an outsider's perspective that I don't really have much experience in the South. But I would just be like, how could those two things coexist at the same place at the same time? Like oil, it seems like oil and water.
Yeah, I mean, we were kids at the time, so teenagers and then I would say early adult years, and I don't think, as a young child coming from like a mixed race family, that I had all of the vernacular and awareness to sort of, the energy would just be different now as a grown ass man and with means to drive myself around and all of those different things. But I don't know, with my buddy, the guy that I'm referring to, I'm thinking about at the top of my head is Rock. I need to call Rock after this and see how he's doing. But like, I just knew him. I just knew him to his core. I knew where he had come from. I knew that was I knew that was a family thing that he inherited just as much as I inherited my black skin or the appreciation for Gunbow or Black History Month. I knew that he had inherited that Confederate flag and whatever that meant to him and his family. And when he talked about heritage and not hate, I knew that when he was rocking that Confederate flag, it wasn't about hating me or anybody that looked like me. It literally was about whatever fictional pride that they have mustered up about what it meant to be a rebel in the South and what it meant to stand up for your rights and push back on some government entity trying to dictate your way of life, like the heritage aspect of that, right? And this may go wrong. This may, again, this is different, very controversial topic, but there is an element to that. And it also is true that like, no, well, the heritage is hatred. The heritage
Yeah.
is slavery. The heritage is prejudice. And like, you can't separate those two. I don't think you can separate that now. But like at the time, I knew that this guy loved me. I knew that he loved me. So like, I knew that he didn't intend for that to be so hurtful for me to see his Confederate flag. And so, that's where we would meet in the middle or whatnot. But,
well, that's the naivety of childhood, right? Like when you're a child, you just, my kids, they're 8 and 10. They don't think about it at all. They just don't until they're spoiled by the real world.
Another thing for me too is my mom never talked about stuff like that. So I come from a mixed race family. My mom she's black, but I would describe her as Creole. And so she has like your skin tone. And so like that sort of black experience is very different. My dad is from the South and looks just like me. I actually look spitting image like my father, which is scary when that happens, when you're like, oh,
you can see the future. You can see the land. You can see where you're going to land.
Yeah, I'm turning into my father. This is crazy. My dad is from rural South Georgia and experienced real deal textbook racism stuff that you hear, and see in movies and the worst of the worst. And so if he ever had known that I was riding around with a guy with a Confederate flag hanging off of his rearview mirror, he probably, he probably would have had some choice words about that. But that's also the dynamic of not growing up around your father and like the impact of things like that,
Well, who's right then? Like the guy obviously has real life experience to feel justified in every way about saying that to you. Like, what the fuck are you doing driving around this guy's truck? At the same time, you have every right to be like, I don't know, this guy's always been nice to me. Like, both things are right at the same time.
Yeah, I think if I had the awareness and if my father was around, if I had an adult in my life, that looked like me to tell me, hey, this isn't a great idea and here's why, I probably would have maneuvered differently. What I can say though is that I did have, for as young as we had eloquent conversations about that Confederate flag. And like the last I'd known of my buddy Rock, he stopped rocking that Confederate flag, probably about 20 years ago.
Right.
If I recall. So I don't remember, as like we transitioned into being adults, like I don't remember that being a thing, So for whatever it's worth, I can look back on that experience and say like, it's important to dialogue. It's important to leave a space for dialogue. It's important to leave space to understand a different person's perspective. And I'm grateful for that experience. So I can look at both sides of the coins when this like sensitivity and these tough issues sort of pop up.
Yeah. So why did you start motoring while black? Like, what is it, and why do you have the Instagram feed? Like, what are you up to?
Yeah, Motoring While Black is just really about celebrating motoring enthusiasts of color, and it started off as like, fast forward a bunch of years, and I had a bunch of cool cars along the way, but we come up with these distinctions in our mind about what's a really cool car and not a cool car. And in my mind, I had bought my first cool car, which was a Mark 8 GTI, and I think I was probably, I don't know. I lived in Venice Beach, California, and I would just walk around and I would take pictures of other people's cars. And I finally bought my little GTI. And the feed originally started off as just a place to put pictures. I didn't want to like flood. I was a working DJ at the time, and so I didn't want to like flood my real Instagram timeline with a bunch of pictures of a Volkswagen GTI.
Right.
And so that's what originally it started off as, essentially as like the beginning of my little car collection, which was a Mark 7, I should say, not a Mark 8, but a Mark 7 5 GTI. And then I always tell people, like, for me, I'll speak for myself because other people feel differently, but for me, taking pictures of my own car got really, really old, really, really fast. And so, but I lived in Venice, and like there was like a lot of these like hidden gems between the locals and the tech bros. There were like cool Alfa Romeos. There was 2002s. There was 901, 911. Actually, all kinds of 911. There were locals that had lowriders, and so the page quickly morphed into like almost like a car spotting type of thing, where it was just like no real intentionality or anything, just like seeing cool cars, taking pictures. Then it morphed into me wanting to take better photos. Like I got really, really inspired by people like Larry Chen and other automotive photographers. And I just really wanted to get better at taking photos, and it became like almost like a hobby. I bought a camera, and then George Floyd happened. And you want to talk about these moments in life where you become very aware of your blackness. You know, uh, I get invited into a lot of rooms, and being black is always present. Like we don't have, I think that's the luxury.
Wait, you can't
That
just turn it off? You
yes,
can't just like
nah,
hit a switch and you just
nah,
stop being black? Like what?
nah. I think some of the privilege that black people get really frustrated about, though, in terms of like white privilege, is like one of those privileges is that you don't necessarily always have to be so conscious of your race, and like as a black person, like it's always there, whether it's like front and center or not. But it ebbs and flows. It's not every day that I woke up thinking about, oh, like it sucks to be black in this white America. Like it's not like that. But there it ebbs and flows, especially speaking for myself, who has a very beautiful life and is great. I'm doing much better than where we came from. But when that George Floyd situation happened, like the awareness of blackness and the disparities and the death and all of that became like front and center. And actually very similar to a moment that we're having right now with conflict and war and stuff like that. Just posting about cars felt really old, like felt very poor taste to me. Like the timing of it, it just didn't feel right. And so I became very hyper aware of my blackness. I also really sparked something that I had done in the past, but didn't have the language or the intentionality around it until then. But it really sparked my creativity and my focus around like journalism as a style of photography. And that really kind of came up with documenting, the protests and whatnot. And because of this, so the confluence of me picking up the camera, learning that skill, being black, being in the cars, living through George Floyd, what that morphed into was I started looking for other people that look like me and these everyday sort of car scene scenarios that I would find myself in. And I found it to be very limited. Like there just wasn't that many. But I would see them because I was maneuvering around and I was doing different things in different sides of town in different circles. And like, so I would see them, but it wasn't like consistent. And I would see like Sabat Young or Adrian Miles on a channel like Petrolicious, right? But it wasn't consistency. And so something happened and I just decided to sort of like, really focus on the black automotive experience, the black experience being the subject and the context, being the automotive community. And it just kind of took off from there, to be honest. And so now what I would just say the brand is, or how I operate, is just using my platform as a way to not only showcase my cars and like my experience, just being a black enthusiast that's like connected in the scene and is doing relatively cool stuff from what other people have suggested, but also just taking a moment. There's so many like black like agents and managers and engineers and executives and car builders and creatives and other photographers. And so like I'm really just documenting my experience as a black automotive enthusiast. And every time I get the opportunity to sort of also take that light off of me and shine it on another creator or another engineer or a designer or partner with a brand to help bring some cultural awareness and sensitivity to their brand or platform, like that's what motoring while black is today. And ultimately just trying to tell that story of the black motoring enthusiasts in a celebratory way, and also acknowledge the advocates along the way, because there's a lot of advocacy that's happening, in front of the camera and behind the scenes as well. So
Petrolbox is a monthly service made specifically for the automotive enthusiast. Each month, they carefully select items including tools, detailing supplies, apparel, garage gear, stickers, and publications to be sent right there to your doorstep. It's a curated selection of the latest and greatest gear in the industry, and there's actually 2 different levels of subscription to choose from. The Petrolbox Basic costs less than $20 a month, while the Petrolbox Premium gets you even more gear for $39.95 a month. Check them out at mypetrolbox.com and be sure to use the code Overcrest at checkout to get $6 off your first month.
Yeah, it's when I think critically about this stuff, like as a white dude, my inclination is to be like, well, everybody just wants to be treated the same. And I think that's the trap that you fall into, is
Mhm.
like it's like, oh, I just want you. Let's say I'm doing like a get together or something like that. You want everybody to show up, and you want everybody to just feel fine and be the same. And it's truly not. I truly don't think that's what we need. I think we like the celebration of diversity and everything when everybody shows up is probably what makes it makes it most important. Having just washing it all out so everybody just feels a certain way, probably is not what we're after.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, there's like a lot of, ironically, in my daytime, in my sort of regular work, I work in sort of like people and talent strategy and dynamics, and so I'm like well versed in the difference between like diversity and inclusion, and like that's kind of what you're describing. Like diversity is just kind of like having like, it's like, and diversity is sort of like an invitation to the party, but like inclusion is being asked to dance.
Mm.
And there's like all of these metaphors and images that are out there that shows like the difference between like equality and equity and things like that. But I think we have a mutual friend, Joshy.
Yep.
And Josh, I love Joshy. Shout out Earth to Robots. I think that's the brand now, Earth to Robots, but more affectionately known as Joshy Robots. Good dude, good human.
Good dude. He's honestly one of the people that put me on this path to thinking critically about this stuff.
Yeah, he's a good dude. He makes me think critically about how I maneuver sometimes and stuff like that. Even being on my own journey. But he had called me once, and he sort of was. And I had been aware of these rallies and things like what you guys do, but I think Brendan McKay is actually the first person that I had seen show. We had overlap in being based in LA and being into photography, and I think that's the first time that I had seen your brand. And so I had awareness of it. I sort of had awareness of like Robin's rally and things like that, but didn't really, I was still doing my own thing and didn't really like, there's so much to be into. So I'm like, until I get an invitation until I need to be aware of it, like I'm just not aware. It's okay. And Joshy called me once, and he sort of was describing, I don't know if he was describing Overcrest or if he was describing Robbins, or if he was just describing his normal life of like rallying. He's like, how come there aren't more people of color doing this? Like, why are my friends that are of color, like, why am I black? And he didn't say black. I don't remember what the words exactly, but
it's a good question though, man.
He was kind of asking me, like the why behind it. And it's so many layers. And the first thing I will say is that Black people are not monolithic. So like my journey is like so much different, than everybody. A kid that grew up in South Central LA playing with lowriders that never left South Central, never left Compton, went to high school out in Compton, like that experience is so much different than somebody that like me who got plucked out of the hood, landed in some rich suburban area. It's a complete, everybody's perspective and situation is just so different. But like my perspective for Joshy, just like thinking about it critically in that moment, it was just like, it's a lot of different reasons, access is one of those reasons, are they invited? Two, like Black people need to be careful speeding on back roads, like in any rural part of the country. Like, I bought a
Let's take these
Mustang.
one at a time as we go through these. You said, like, are they invited? And then we'll talk about speeding as a black guy in a sports car. I think is probably terrifying. So are they invited? Right. So, like, do I need, or do they need to feel invited? Like, is there a reason that they wouldn't just assume that they're invited?
Mhm. Anytime that you are looking at something that looks predominantly white, you're skeptical, or like there's an assumption. Like I am the fact that we're having this conversation, and I've taken the time to appreciate and understand what you are doing, and have also gone on Robin's like, I understand what's happening a little bit more. But before all of this, what I saw was a bunch of white guys thrashing their Porsches in Utah or Oregon or wherever you guys were driving, you know. So like,
Yep.
it looked like a very white thing, and nobody sent me an invitation. I didn't know if I would be, you know, like, so I think there's, and again, I'm speaking for myself. Black people are not monolithic, so you don't know. I'm just sharing my experience. So yeah, there's an access thing, and like sometimes you don't care about that. You just like kick down the door, and you're like, I want to be invited to this. And sometimes you're like, this looks cool, but I don't feel like breaking any like racial barriers. Sometimes it just needs to be somebody there in the scene, which is like important for me on some of these things, to just like be there and to show my face and to show my experience, and hopefully like open the door for another person of color that says that, like, oh, okay, like he's there, he approved, like he's down with it, like, oh, okay, it must not be that big of a deal. But yeah, I mean, until somebody, I think people like yourself, you know, people that run rallies like Robbins, people that run that like Texas Hill Country stuff, I think, yeah, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional about invite. If you want it, if you want the diversity and you want others, you know, people of color to feel included, like, yeah, you have to be intentional about extending those invitations, because a lot of people are going to be like, I don't see any black people. That must not be for me. Let me go to where the black people are at.
Yep.
You know, because I don't feel like dealing with a bunch. I don't, and like speaking for myself, like as a person who is self-supporting, has been, you know, I look younger, but I'm older now. Like my younger, I don't really walk around talking about being rich or anything like that. But my younger version of the teenage version of me would look at me and say, "Wow, you've made it. You're rich." Like, you know, but we all know that there's layers to this.
Yes.
You know, there's the difference.
Just like there's always more money, just like there's always more horsepower, man. There's always more.
Yeah. There's a difference between a base model 997, 911 and a Carrera GT, right? Like there's levels to this. So I'm not claiming to be rich, but like as a person that's self-supporting, that can afford this lifestyle, that isn't struggling in that regard, that has transitioned from survival mode to thrival mode, I'm not going anywhere where I'm not welcome and wanted and celebrated and appreciated. You know, I don't have to. I don't need the favor. I don't have to. You know, so yeah, there's a you know.
How do you make people feel invited without being like, I need to go find black people to come on my event because I want them there and I want the diversity and I want different stories and different backgrounds. And I mean, that's what I love. I love talking to different people with different stories and different backgrounds and things I've never heard of before and different cultures. But like, how do I like, and I'm not trying to make, this is, I guess, a little about me and how I feel, but like, how do I approach that? How do I make it seem like I'm not just out like, I need black people on my event? Like, and have like a genuine conversation about wanting to have diversity of story and culture.
Yeah. And it's a great question, and it's a tough question. And I think the reason it's tough, because then there's a fine line and it becomes like, wait a minute, am I the token here? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that is what you don't want to do. And it's tough. Like there's no specific recipe. You know, I could just share, you know, my experience with like Robbins is like, I went into the situation very side eye, you know, like as the only black person on the rally. I'm like, why am I here? Like, am I the token black guy in this scenario? Like, what am I here just because I'm black? Like, what is like, you know, so it took a while for me to sort of like unpack that brick wall that I even had there for myself. And so like, there's not a, there's not a clear definitive answer to that. But what I can say is what helped me is like somebody like Joshy reaching out to just like uncover the why, like why don't people like you show up to these things? Mm-hmm. Somebody like Michael extending me the invitation, right? And then people like Dorothy and Sarah and Joshy and Dorian and Smiley and Lindsay, surrounding me with love on that journey until I felt comfortable and like I felt like a part of the group. So it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. I don't envy your position. I would have to put more critical thought into it, but yeah, it's a dynamic that you have to be conscious of. And like, I acknowledge that it's not an easy thing to do to make sure that people get access and feel invited, but also don't feel it like they're a token invite at the same time, and it's hard. And there's not a formulaic way to,
I'm sure you've got a bullshit meter too, like you can detect the bullshit pretty fast, right?
Yeah. But you have to assume too, like a lot of people are going to assume bullshit right off the bat, like, yeah. But a lot of times it just takes a couple, it just takes one or two people. Black people are really big on like, there are trailblazers and there are innovators out there that don't care about any of that. But a lot of times Black people, like just the history in this country is, like they need to know that there's somebody else over there that's doing like that looks like them, like just out of a safety concern. Like I wouldn't go around in rural Georgia, like by myself with a bunch of white people. No, I would have to be very, very careful with that and scope that. Like somebody invited me to a scout rally, like a international harvester scout. And then it was in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. And I looked at the page. I didn't see any other, like, no, I'm from this. I grew up in the South. I'm from South Central LA, but I grew up in the South. So I claim Atlanta as well. And I'm like, nah, I know in the South, there's a lot of gun-toting, drunk white men. You ain't gonna catch me out in the middle of the woods trying to ride.
Dude, I don't know if I was in Tennessee or West Virginia, but I was coming back from the Ruchelos rally in 9/11, and I drove by this dude, and he had a Confederate flag flying outside of his garage, and the entire front of, and this is like some lean-to garage, man. I mean, please just paint the thing or it's going to fall down tomorrow type of place. And out in the front is like beer can, like driveway, like just crushed beer cans, throws them out. And the whole driveway was just beer cans. And then dude had like a Confederate Army hat on. And I'm like, I got to see what this dude's about. But that, like, I don't know, man, like I can do that. You can't do that, So there's definitely like you have to be aware of your surroundings.
1,000%. And you can do it. Like I could do it, but I just have to, you have to, is it worth your life? You might be risking your life trying to explore. But to answer your question, I think you have to operate with integrity, like hold yourself to the highest integrity when you're thinking about making your event more inclusive or more accessible to people that look like me or Black people. Like really do it from a place of earnestness and integrity, and be intentional about the invitations and put some measures in place to make sure people feel truly included when they're there, because that's in my corporate world, that's a whole nother thing too. It's like we can get people in the door, but like, do they feel like they belong there when it's all said and done? And it's like, it's not a given. It's not a given that happens. So I don't envy that position and happy to dialogue more one-on-one if you ever need to brainstorm on stuff like that.
It's I try to think of in terms of like, what if I was going to go to a lowrider event in South Central or like a donk event here in Minneapolis? I would feel weird as shit just walking up to this event as the only white dude. Like it's I don't know. Like I don't know. Like I don't know how to act. I don't know. Like, can I just it's a different culture. It's like almost going, in a way, it's like going to a different place where you don't know the norms and you don't know like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And it doesn't come from me. It doesn't come from a place of fear. It just comes from like a cultural discomfort of not knowing how to act, or am I going to fit in here? Are they going to kick me out? Like, what do I do? So I imagine it's tough.
And I would say to like my fellow people of color, like there's also the dynamic of just like introvertedness and extrovertedness as well. Like we also have to have like the courage to step into these rooms where like we are the only one, or we don't know anybody. That's what the car scene is. Like it doesn't even matter what color you are. When you first get into these scenes, you step there and you're like, I had a person, a young Latina woman, tell me that she wanted to go to race service the other week, but she didn't have anybody to go with. And she was like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get there. I'm like, just go, So there's a part of it too that's like, if you're a person of color and you see something that looks cool and online, and that you want to be a part of it too, like you got to also, there's a part where we have to take ownership as well and just like put the foot out. Like I know a lot of people that probably would have turned Robbins down. I didn't really have the context. I didn't really know who was there or that it was special or anything like that. I don't know. I luckily had some other friends like Dorothy and Smiley or whatnot that were like very encouraging. And I just kind of like, against all of the blackness inside of me, was just like, you know what? I'm going to pay somebody to go be the only black man on this journey and just see what happens and just go with the flow. Like, but that's a luxury too. When we talk about access, like a lot of times there's like money involved too. I had the luxury to do that, which is another thing that me and Joshie had kind of talked about, and we can circle back around to that. But the access thing is one of them. The second thing was like legal, like the law, dealing with the law. The third thing is just like the preciousness and the monetary aspect of it. Like not a lot of black, like it, I don't want to use generalizations and again, black people are not monolithic, but one of the money thing too is like I was sort of describing for Joshie, like you go crazy with your Porsche. Like you treat the thing like it's
he's
disposable.
Ready to die, man. He's ready to die.
That's a whole nother thing in terms of like life preservation, but I'm just talking about the car and the monetary aspect of the car, right? When you're talking about a person like me, a black guy that came from the lower income, lower social economical status in South Central LA, that is miraculously, despite the cocaine 80s, despite divorce, despite my own indiscretions and mistakes and as a child, and have come out on the other end of this. People like me should be dead or in jail. Let's just get that. Like this podcast may not be the forum to share all of this stuff, but I will tell you, like one-on-one, like if you knew all of the history and the deal, people like me should be dead or in jail. That's just the statistics. So for me to come out on the other end of it and to like have this 9/11, it's a very precious thing for me now. Like I'm speaking about it in retrospect, but now I like actually going on that rally, like was very helpful for me letting go of the preciousness. But like, and
do you feel like it's something that can be taken away from you? Very like this, like it would just be taken away.
Oh yeah, anything. But it's just like, you never know who you're dealing with, but based on the history that we know of Black Americans in this country, that 9/11 might be the most precious, the most expensive, the nicest item that they've ever had in their entire life, the symbol of their success, the symbol of their transition from being a broke boy in South LA to being a wealthy tech dude, like you just never know the history. And so like, for me, like, I don't know a lot of Black people that want to go thrash their Porsche on a back road. Like, I just don't know that, so
I feel like that's kind of like a universal thing though. Like a lot of like, when you look at these objects that are expensive, I mean, it's one of those things where most people don't want to beat on their car until they do, and then they realize how incredible it is, right? And then it's just
Yeah.
like, I grew up, in a pretty shitty situation too, heroin
Hmm.
mom, different things, jumping around house to house.
Hmm.
And, like there's a point where I go, well, if I lose this car, especially with my 911 now, if something happens to that car, I'll never get another one. But you got to try to put that, out of your mind and
Yeah.
continue to do it anyway. I think there's different variations of that precious.
Yeah. And I hear you on that. And I'm so glad you said that, because there are some elements there's all these like elements where like you think it's because you're black, and it's like that's really just a societal class money thing, right? That's
Yeah.
that's more of just a capitalistic mindset sort of thing, the scarcity sort of mindset that is a part of our American culture as a whole. And so it's important for us to like understand that dynamic, and like, yeah, it has nothing to do with skin color. But I would just say that there's probably more, like when I think about all of the people that drive Porsches and stuff like that, there's probably more people of color that are coming from those like that sort of dynamic that you just described from yourself,
Yep.
than a lot of our counterparts. And at least it feels that way. And, luckily we're adults enough to know that like feelings are not always facts, but like,
Yep.
it feels that way a lot. But the law thing, if you want to circle back around that.
Yeah, man. I think of you driving around in that hot 2002, just like, are you just constantly looking in the rearview mirror at all times, or what? Like, what is
Not
the
so.
feeling like? Like comedians joke about it all the time. I'm sure Chris Rock has like 10 jokes about being pulled over as a black dude, and I'm sure they're all hilarious. But with every joke, there's truth, right? So there's truth in that.
Yeah. So I would say being able to afford an attorney is relaxed me a lot when it comes to stuff like that. I don't really use, I actually just celebrated 9 years sober. And so I'm never behind the wheel drunk. I'm not riding around with any contraband. I don't really know what the gun laws are in California and whatnot, but I don't really ride around with any weapons. And so like, if the most, that can happen to me is getting pulled over for doing a burnout, like in downtown Los Angeles. Like, God bless the fact that I have enough cash flow to like hire an attorney for that. And like, I'm gonna do that and live my life. But there are certain dynamics, So when I started to transition from that feeling of being in survival mode into thrival mode, it doesn't happen to the family all at the same time, right? So my family house in South Central Los Angeles, we just sold it last year in 2023. My mom lived at the family house up until 2023, the old family house that's been in our family for 60 years in South Central LA. And so what that means is if my mom lives there and my grandmother lives there, what that means is I spend a lot of time going back there, despite that I live in a nicer part of town now. And like, I don't really have any beater cars anymore, so to speak. And, what would happen for a while is I would drive my nicer cars back to the hood to go visit my family, and the police would pull me over often. Ironically, though, my dad is a former cop. So you will, despite George Floyd and all of that stuff that happened, you'll never hear me use the phrase "all cops are bastards." I can't. Like, I just can't use it. I would literally be calling my dad a bastard. Like,
Right.
And then my godfather in California was also a long-standing police officer. Like when he passed, like the chief of police came and spoke at his funeral. And so like in a weird twist of fate, like, yeah, blue lives do matter for me and my family. Like, cops matter, they're not all bastards. Like, I know a lot of cops and their families intimately. I give all of that backdrop to say that like I know how to handle myself in an interaction with a police officer. And so there are definitely things that you can say and do to de-escalate the situation if you were to ever get pulled over. And then I've also come across, racist and bigoted people, whether they're in uniform or out of uniform, and it's just a hassle. It's just a hassle.
I've never been scared of being pulled over, man. Like I get pulled over, I'm just
That's
like,
crazy.
here's my driver's license. Like,
That's
yes, sir. No, I don't know how fast I was going. I apologize, sir. That's the way it is. It's never crossed my mind. Like if the guy walking up, I've never thought about it before. Like in the interaction, nothing has ever crossed my mind about fearing the police officer that's coming up to the car.
Yeah, I can't say I feel less fearful now after a number of years of successfully navigating those situations, even if I was in the wrong, and having family that are members of law enforcement or were members of law enforcement, but that has not always been the case in terms of like the fear around it. And I also know that at any given time I could run into the wrong officer and it could be, it can go down. So like, there's definitely fear there. And that's the point of what I was, talking to Joshy about was, there's an element of this of like certain Black people are just not going to risk getting shot or going to jail just to drive their Porsche on a dirt road in whatever rural part of the country that we're talking about. Like for a lot of people, it just isn't worth the hassle.
Yeah, the police per capita out there, it's pretty low. Not a lot of cops.
I believe that.
Not a lot of cops out there.
I believe that. You're speaking the right language, but a lot of Black people don't know that. You know what I mean? But
although I have been scouting and like accidentally turned into what was a driveway and had a dude like walk out on his porch with a shotgun. So that's the other, that's the other aspect of it too. So yeah, not a lot of cops, but maybe there's a lot of dudes on their porches with shotguns. So who knows?
Yep. So, but yeah, man, it's scary. I kind of feel like if I was to get taken out now, so many people know my story. If I was to get taken out by a cop now, like so many people know my story and what I'm about and like how I operate and how I vibrate and what kind of career that I did have a cop pull me over in Venice a couple of years ago. I was in a Mustang driving a little bit fast. And he pulled me over and he's like, "Who you roll with?" And I'm like, "Huh?" Like I knew what he meant, but I was just like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Who you roll with? You don't gangbang?" And this was at a time where they were just pulling Black people over and putting them in their gang database, which is crazy. It's just crazy. Like I'm a grown ass man at this point. This is probably about 5 years ago. And I'm like, "No, sir. No, I don't gangbang. I'm an HR professional for a tech company. I'm sorry, I was driving fast. Is there anything else that I did wrong?"
Yeah.
But it's crazy, man. It is crazy. It is unfortunate, and it's unfortunate that a lot of these like police brutality things sort of happen, based on traffic stops, which is, a dynamic that we have to be very conscious of and fight against that element. But I think when we talk about like, well, why don't Black people or why don't people of color, why are they hesitant or why don't they show up at things like that? There's an element there that's not easily reversed. And like, if that wasn't the case, like situations like Rodney King and George Floyd and all of the countless other people that have lost their lives over the past, 100 years or so, like, also too, just the idea of how the police were created and stuff like that based on like slave patrol and all that stuff. Yeah, it's not a thing that you can just fix overnight, but I think the law and the legal trouble aspect of it is like, you might drive your Porsche on a back road and you might, get pulled over and get a ticket. Maybe at the worst case, you get your car towed. Like a Black person speeding on the back road with a Porsche, like they may catch a bullet. That's a big risk to have some back road fun.
It's so wild that is so inconceivable to me. Like it's so inconceivable that could happen, and I understand that you feel that way. And it's obviously it comes from a place of realness. And it's so difficult for me to understand and realize in my mind that that's a possibility. It just seems so otherworldly to me that I can't. It's like my biggest worry when I'm out on driving or scouting is that I'm going to run out of gas. That's my biggest worry. Like and it's weird, man. It's hard for me to understand.
And yes, I can understand. I can understand. That's I don't even actually know what your ethnic demographic is, but like I would say that like that's the part of the privilege, that Black people start to talk about when they say like white privilege and things of that nature. Not to say that we don't have our own Black privilege or privilege, and not to say that I'm not privileged in any way myself, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough until you have that Black skin.
Dude,
It's hard to maneuver.
I grew up in Wisconsin in a small town, and there were 0 Black people in my high school. I'll just
Wow.
say that. I just say that.
There's
very lack of diversity, man. There's none.
Well, that's why people like you need Black friends to help create that awareness. Not to say that you don't have any Black friends, but just like, I saw something the other day, and it was I can't even remember what it was, but I was like, I had sent it to my group chat of like motoring club friends, and something was off color, like, just off. And I was like, this is why you need a Black person in your circle. Because people will say and do stuff they put out there. They're like, wow.
Yeah, otherwise they're making color TV jokes all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to like step away from car culture for a second and just get your thoughts. And this is more just like a conversation. I don't think, maybe you are an expert on it. I'm not. It's just kind of just talking. Is one of the things that I saw, and I watched this video of yours, and I may play it as like an intro to the beginning of the episode, but it really talks about the freedom that a car can give you. And it seemed like something that, I preach on that a lot. I think the car is the biggest tool for personal autonomy that human beings have ever had. Being able to like walk out of your house, get in your car, and go where you want to go, as long as you got enough gas, go where you want to go is huge. And I've lived in some really poor neighborhoods. I know what a food desert is, but I've always had a car, right? When I lived in San Francisco, I lived in a pretty shitty neighborhood, and I couldn't really leave. I didn't have a car. I couldn't leave. I had to hop on the train. So I ended up just like going. I lived by the Cow Palace, actually, in San Francisco. It was like bars on the windows type of stuff. And I remember my bike getting all the wheels and shit stolen off of it. It was not a great neighborhood, but I couldn't leave it. It was really difficult to leave. But if I had a car, I could have left. I could have gone somewhere else. I could have shopped where I wanted to shop. I could have went to a good grocery store instead of the Quickie Mart down the street that had nothing but candy and fucking cans of Manwich. You know what I mean? So I see the car, especially if you have a family, as a way for you to have autonomy to look for a job that you want, not only jobs that are available. You can go and you can get food. You can help your kids with their education. You can take your family where you want to take them. You can visit family. You can get out. You can leave. And I think that's something that has been slowly shrinking as some places have really great public transportation. San Francisco is great. I don't know what LA is like. New York is great. Chicago is pretty good. A lot of the places in this country don't have good public transportation. They're essentially worthless, which is another conversation of how to improve that. But you have these people that are getting priced out as the average cost of a car is now like $45,000 for a brand new car. Not that anybody in this group I'm talking about, which is like underprivileged, impoverished, lower middle class, is going to be buying like some crazy nice car or anything like that. But that trickles down. And as these cars have gotten more complicated, the labor and the parts to keep them on the road has gotten way more expensive as well. So you have these people that are like slowly being priced out of personal autonomy. And this obviously impacts, Black people at a ratio that it affects others less. So I want to just get your thoughts on, personal autonomy and driving and why cars matter.
Yeah, it's such a rich topic, and it's a really good question, and it is kind of sad. I think it is kind of sad that like people, like I have a lot of younger kids, so like I'm very I wouldn't say tapped in, but just like conscious of like the younger generation. Like I have younger cousins and nieces, and I don't have any kids myself, but I have, concerned about the younger generation. Like I notice how much of a less of an emphasis they put on driving, and how harder it is for them. Like where I came from, everybody got a car when they were 16,
Yeah. It's like a birthright. You just had to do it.
Yeah, 1,000%. We moved away from that. And like, I always like tell people when they ask me like, hey, what are your like long-term objectives? And one of them for me is like, I want to start a foundation in my mother's name that's really focused on drivers education. And because like she was always really big on that. Like when I turned 14, she's like, you got to go get your driver's permit. You got to learn how to drive. And like I seen her do that with like the younger generations in my family. Well, she'll pay for driver instruction and things like that. But yeah, it's tragic, and I'm like very aligned. I think it's not tragic; it's probably an extreme description, but I think there's a certain thing that's eroding before our very eyes. In addition to many other things, but for me, mobility, and it's kind of like captured in that freedom of the road. Like for me, physical mobility is always equated to social mobility.
Yeah.
And so when I think about my own journey and where I'm at today on that social economical ladder, like I have no clue how I would have done that without the physical means of a car to get me to that job at the retail store at Ace Hardware, right? Or to get me to that job interview with Enterprise Rent a Car. Like I just don't, and it's crazy, like we're in a different time and space right now where so much of what we do is virtual.
Yeah.
And so like, there's a ton of opportunities there to sort of still thrive without a car. But I do feel like there's also a push to kind of go back in person in a lot of scenarios too. And so, yeah, it's scary to think about autonomy and mobility being limited, especially in places like a Los Angeles or like the rural town that I grew up in Georgia, where the mass transportation situation is very poor, and in some parts very dangerous as well.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. It's getting stuck on a light rail and going back and forth. I mean, I know here in Minneapolis, there's a lot of crime on the light rail, on the train.
Yeah.
There's a lot of crime that happens. A lot of people get mugged, beat up, assaulted. And if you're in a car, you don't have to deal with any of that. And I think that a lot of this autonomy and mobility discussion gets lost in the utopian thoughts of reurbanization of like society and urban places. And which is like, it's really wonderful to think that we could all live in societies where you could just walk everywhere to get what you need. But it just is not that way. It is just isn't. It might be if you live in some like ultra elite, like new neighborhood in Norway, or like some like brand new bougie, urban district and whatever. But it isn't like that for most people. It isn't like that. So when you go through and you pass all these laws that make it expensive to park places, you make it, and all these regulations make cars expensive, it only hurts the lower class.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's definitely tough, and we need to do. Yeah, the situation with the rising cost and the inflation, like that's a whole situation where I'm like, it's so hard to even wrap my head around and fathom how that is going, and like there's a part of me that like knee jerk reaction is like, well, you can always buy an older car, but then like, there is the cost around, there is the cost around maintenance and repair and upkeep. And like, I think about my own purchase of the 911, like it's just crazy. And that 911 is a far cry from what we're talking about. What we're talking about is sort of basic mobility, but like, even like a Honda Corolla, like I don't even know the price point of a Honda Corolla or Toyota Corolla right now, but, things are not as accessible as they once were. And
the complication of everything is going crazy too. I mean, they're so complicated. Like you can't even be a guy that's going to save money by working on your own shit, because you need a new bumper on your new car. It's got LiDAR in it. Like, how is a dude going to recalibrate his LiDAR on his even a new Corolla, for that example? It's a bummer, man.
Yeah.
I don't know where it all goes.
And I haven't gotten too involved in like the part of SEMA that is working on the legislation and all of that. But, my ears really perk up when I hear that, because we do need to preserve that right to repair. And, I'm not really too political, but sometimes, like when I hear some of the liberal perspectives on things like that, it's kind of scary. It almost seems like people just don't want us to drive anymore, period.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, just because of the way our cities are sort of laid out, and the way that the urban planning has occurred. And so I just don't understand how that would work out.
I think it just comes down to, like, I don't think they're being malevolent about it. They don't want you to not drive. I don't think is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think they want you to exist in the system. And this goes for both sides. Both sides want you to live in the system that is their ideal system, right? They think that their idea is this idea, and they want you to live within that box. And in this case, the system is like public transportation. If you need help, we'll help you. We'll get you sorted out. We'll create a safety net for you, rather than the autonomy part of it. They're like, you don't need autonomy. We got you. When in reality, it's like the best thing you can have, I think. And I'm in it. This is my biggest political issue, is making sure that people can drive and take care of themselves. Nobody knows better what's better for you than you.
CSF Cooling has always been at the forefront of quality products for a fair price. With a rich history stretching over 7 decades, they provide the best high-performance and OEM Plus cooling systems on the market today. CSF offers over 3,000 different cooling applications for the most popular makes and models on the road today. From classic copper brass radiators for Land Cruisers, Jeeps, and Datsuns, to vintage 80s Mercedes, BMW, and Audi and Porsche platforms, all the way up to new vehicles. Check out their expanding Classic Series lineup, and be sure to check them out at csfrace.com or on social media.
Yeah. And there's a popular pundit or a sort of talking head in our space that says that, like, if America won't take away guns, like, they won't take away our cars. They're like, I don't know. Like, I saw that there's an initiative on the ballot or something in California to sort of like limit the speed limit of cars or something like that, like from the factory. Which
old cars are going to start worth like tons of money, man. Like like a 1996 Camry is going to be worth a fortune. That's all I know.
I believe that.
Yeah. Well, dude, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking through some of this stuff with me. I feel like I learned a lot.
No doubt.
We should talk about getting you out on some events. I'd love to have you. I'd love to hear more of your stories, and have you out on the rally sometime. There's an open invite for you anytime.
Appreciate that. And like, for those that may be chiming in, because they see that I'm on the podcast or whatnot. So the section of my audience that doesn't have a clue about what a Robbins rally is or an Overcrest, like, while I have your attention, like, I'm just curious, like, tell me the genesis and like in your own words, kind of like, what is Overcrest? What does it mean for you? And kind of like, how has it evolved? If you have the time to answer that question.
Yeah. I think, Overcrest kind of started out when I was, man, how much time do you have? Overcrest started for me when I realized, almost in the same way that you did, that driving can be an escape. It is a place where, for me, I left hurtful places and got in my car and was able to leave them behind. And that's kind of where, like, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be that. It's kind of evolved since there. I think exploration is really, really important. I think it's important to expose yourself to new things, maybe uncomfortable things. I think if you can, I think if you go through your day-to-day, like, you can't you can't wish away the minutia of life, which is like the just the every day, the stuff like, I mean, this might be a memorable day because we got to talk and meet each other for the first time, but like yesterday, maybe in 3 months will be completely forgotten. And that's the way that most of our life is. And you can't you can't say those days aren't important because they are, but you really have to make sure that you're able to somehow break from that mold. It's kind of crass, and I don't say it as much as I used to anymore, but I used to say, if you're not exploring, you might as well be dead. And whether it's cars or not cars, I feel like it can be food, music, art. I don't care what it is. You need to be out there exploring and exposing your mind to new things, new cultures, and letting your brain slow down. Because when you're going through your day-to-day life, you're opening up the file cabinet and you're just pulling out like the same file that's in your mind of that you, when you wake up in the morning and you're in your bedroom and you walk around your bedroom and you leave, you didn't look at anything. Your brain, it knows what's there. It's already experienced all of it. It doesn't need to analyze anything. That moment in time is like deleted. It's like it never even happened. But when you go and you experience something new, your brain has to stop and go, what the fuck is this? What is that? It has to like slow down. There's nothing in the file cabinet for what you're experiencing at that given time. And that's experiences with friends. That's experiences with places that you're going to do or see and experience, whether it's a shop or like a restaurant or the food or a new road or a new place. And I truly believe that the car is the best way to see and experience new things in that way for me. Lots of other people do it in different ways, mountain climbing, mountain biking, whatever it is. But for me, I think the car is an insane tool to express personal liberty and learning and experiencing new things. So the rally kind of started with like, I did this film with my buddy Alex called Das Ziel. It's on YouTube. It's on the Stanceworks YouTube channel. And it was just like us fucking around making this film about driving my 911 across the country, which to me was like, okay, just drive it. Like get in the car, start the car, and then drive it to another place. And for some reason, and the film really resonated with people, and they're like, hey man, that was really cool. You've really inspired me to go drive my car and take the car, which is kind of like our hashtag that we ended up with, was take the car. And then I did this article for 000 magazine about driving out to Rensport, and people saw that and they were like, oh my God, this would be great. And I'd always planned automotive events. Like I've done rallies and car shows here in Minnesota. And me and Jeff and Jake got together and we said, let's see what we can do to try and get out there and explore with people. What can we do? How can we make this happen? How can we inspire people to get out there and experience these new things and just be somewhere they're not? Take a risk, right? Like the places we go, there isn't many people there. It's a risk. It's a risk of you're going to leave work. You're going to spend your own personal capital and your own personal finances to get there. You're going to take the risk that your car might break down or whatever the case may be. It's a risky endeavor. I mean, not that risky. Like we're not in fucking Bolivia or something, right? But in terms of like Western civilization, what people do with their little, like with their lives where they don't really get out of their life, it's a risky maneuver, especially for a lot of people that haven't done anything like that before. I've heard people be like, dude, I'm scared. I'm scared to come on this rally. Like, what if I get lost? Like, you don't give us a GPS. You give us a route book. And they don't know what to, but like, it's good for them. It's good. And it's really inspiring to like try and bring more and more people into the fold. Like we have our rallies in Utah in a few months, and we're having as many new people come as we can. It's not a good old boys club, right? We're trying to make sure that we can have as many new people come to experience this, and hopefully we can infect them and send them back to wherever they live, and they can infect all their friends and with the drive to explore. That's kind of what it's all about.
That's really cool. And I haven't been on a ton of rallies yet, but the one that I went on that really stood out, like it sort of really came home for me after like thrashing after being like sort of side eye and like wondering like, why am I here, to breaking my Porsche and seeing so many people like rally around me to try to like, no pun intended, but like sort of rally around me to try to make the Porsche okay, to the point where I just like had to accept that the car was down. I limped it home. And then like about halfway home, I was like looking at people's locations on our route and on the app and things of that nature. And I was like, you know what? I could probably get another car and rejoin the rally for like the last leg of it.
Yeah.
And I got the car home, went and found another car, ended up rejoining the rally. So it was like one of those like full circle transformative moments where it was like so meaningful and so special. And
how long did it take you to unplug your mind? Like for me, when I get in a car and I'm going on a road trip, it takes me about like 3 hours. And then it's like I've just like disconnected from where I was, and now I'm at this place. It's like the entire road trip almost is a place that you're visiting.
Yeah, I would say for me, it probably kicked in like right around day 2. Yeah, so yeah, not the first 3 hours, but like right around day 2 when I started to get into a part of California that I had never seen before, never explored. So maybe about halfway through day 1, I remember like separating from the group and just pulling over into this like little vista viewpoint type thing and just like really soaking it all in, like taking it all in and just this moment in time, and not really caring about other people or any routes or anything like that, but just like pausing to soak it in. So like, and I think that happened on day 1. So maybe it happened quicker. Maybe the awareness of when I like mentally unplugged is not super crystal clear to me, but yeah, if anybody's listening, I would suggest doing a rally. I bought a whole car now. I don't know if you've mentioned it a couple of times. I bought the O2 just to do rallies.
I lost you there for a second. I lost you there for a second. Is that, were you about to say that's why I bought the 2002?
Yeah, to do rallies. It's my rally car now.
Yeah, man, that thing is dope. Yeah, I knew where you were going. I knew where you were going with it. Well, I'd love to see that thing out there, man. I'm glad you caught the bug. And the problem is that it only gets worse. You explore California a little bit, and then you're like, oh, I wonder what it's like over in Colorado, or I wonder what it's like over here. And then pretty soon you want that sense of discovery. And there's some places that are so remote that when you get out of the car and you're alone and you look around and you realize that you are the only person experiencing that, the only one. There's no one else that is seeing and experiencing what you're experiencing at that given time for that beautiful thing or that beautiful place. And you literally own it. It's like yours. It's like you've rented it from the earth for the time that you're there. And then you leave, and then someone else will come and experience it later. But for that moment, it's 100% yours. And that is like, it sounds like you've had that feeling, and it is awesome. And it's hard to duplicate.
Yeah. Well, yeah, man, thank you so much for the time, and congratulations on all your success. Really appreciate the invitation to join the rally and to just have a conversation about real stuff.
Yeah, man, it was good. When I first started sitting down, like planning out how I was going to do this, I had all these questions written out, and I realized that I was making it all about myself. And I just deleted everything and just decided to just come in and have a conversation about stuff. Cause honestly, I'm sensitive, so I was nervous. Like I didn't really know how to approach it. So I appreciate you being so kind with me and spending the time with me too. I really do appreciate it. It's very generous of you.
Yeah, no doubt. Likewise.
All right, man. You take care of yourself.
All right. You too now.
All right.